Welcome to Respiratory 3204. My name's Brian, and I'm going to make this video for you guys very quickly to discuss the cell membrane and the proteins and all the cool stuff it does. This should be a review for you guys, but this course is very complicated, so it's really good to go over the basics, build upon that, and then get to the nitty-gritty. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the cell membrane. It's the outside of the cell. So the cell membrane, just going to put this up here so we all know what we're talking about. All right, it took me forever to write. Cell membrane. So the cell membrane is composed of three major things. So one is a phospholipid bilayer, two is cholesterol, and three are proteins. All right, so let's just establish this over here. One, we're going to call it the lipid bilayer. Two, we're going to do some cholesterol. And three, we'll do proteins in red because, you know, like muscle and stuff, right? But that doesn't really mean anything. So protein. All right. So let's look at what this cell looks like, or the cell membrane looks like. So you have a cell. Let's do a little cell in green. All right. You have a little nucleus in here, and then you have all your organelles and all this other fun stuff within the cytosol. All right, so how do we protect that? Well, with this lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. So that looks a little bit like this. So you're going to have a ball-looking thing, these two streamers that go down, and then it repeats itself, all right, over and over again. Now remember I said it's a bilayer. So what does this look like? That looks like a unilayer, a monolayer. So you're going to have the other end right here, okay? The like's going to go to the like. We'll explain that in a second. All right, so this is like a cross-section of your lipid bilayer. Now your cells form a sphere. So this, just imagine that. Everything's going to turn to a sphere, but we just cut it in half here. All right, so let's talk about this really quick. So what one of these little guys look like is a balloon with two streamers going down. Let me get rid of this. It's kind of confusing. All right, let's just do that. All right, so let's go here. So let's do different colors for different parts. So the phospholipid bilayer is made up of a bunch of lipid molecules, okay? And these lipid molecules are composed of, let's do this. Woo, hello. Do that. So this would be the phosphate head. I'm just going to write phos just for time. Don't want to bore you guys too much. The glycerol backbone. All right. We're right about there. Glycerol BB for the backbone. And then we have these fatty acid tails, okay? And this creates a polar layer. So let's say 3. Fatty acid tails. Fat, cool. There you go. There's a lot more things that can go into the phosphate head and different compositions of it that can actually change with the cell, but that's a little more complex and is beyond the purpose of this lecture. So just remember, this is the very basic cellular membrane explanation. All right, so let's go into these other two, cholesterols and proteins, and what they're doing in that cell membrane. So let's scroll down a little bit here. I'll leave this right up here if you want to look at it. Might get in the way, though. All right, let me draw another membrane as quickly as I can. All right, so you see we're making this a little bit longer. All right, so this membrane, the whole point is to keep things in the cell that are supposed to be in the cell and keep things out of the cell that are supposed to be out of the cell, as well as regulate different things that go along with different cellular processes. So it's very important. Without it, we would probably puff up and die or something like that. So there's a reason it's there, and it's one of the basics of biology. All right, so I'm drawing our little lipid bilayer here. All right, it's not as pretty, but it works, right? Okay, So in our lipid bilayer, let's talk about some cholesterol really quickly without getting too in depth with it. So cholesterol's dispersed, where do you think? Oh, I didn't go over this part yet. This area right here, the way this is composed, we call this hydrophobic, okay? All right, and we're gonna call the top layer up here hydrophilic. It's very important for the functioning of the cell and cell membrane. So hydrophobic means it doesn't like water. And usually things that are hydrophobic are lipidphilic, okay? So hence we're gonna have cholesterol dispersed inside of this hydrophobic area of the cell membrane. Now what cholesterol does, let's do this, is maintains the integrity and the fluidity of the cell. In the simplest sense. Okay? All right. So changes in temperature, pH, and things like that can alter the fluidity of the cell membrane. In the simplest sense. So it will maintain homeostasis as far as that goes. It's very important, actually, and we can talk about that later on in the semester, but we're just talking about the components here. Next thing we're going to have are the proteins. So we're going to do the proteins here in green because it's very striking. The proteins are the most important part of our cell membrane, okay? So the only things that diffuse through the cell membrane, not the only things, but the things that diffuse through the cell membrane with the most efficiency are small nonpolar molecules. Sorry, I can't talk right now. Small nonpolar molecules. Okay, so without these proteins, that's the only thing that would really efficiently diffuse through the cell membrane, and our body requires a lot more things to go in and out of our cell to actually function. So I'll define those, just give you a quick example of small nonpolar molecules that diffuse easily, and it'll make a lot of sense to you, okay? So the small nonpolar molecules we have, I always want to say proteins, I don't know why. Small, and I'm going to just do NP, make our lives easier. Think of oxygen and CO2, okay? It's pretty much how it all works for us. So oxygen and CO2 are two examples of things that can diffuse freely and efficiently throughout this lipid bilayer, okay? Things that need help, right? So we have electrolytes. We look at electrolytes a lot in our labs and critical care, or just in general. So electrolytes are quite the opposite. They're not very large, but they're very charged and polar, okay? So these things need help getting through this membrane because we have to maintain homeostasis as far as maybe like fluid tonicity, so you think of sodium, conduction and things like that, repolarization, all these things. So things like sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, +2+, and calcium, and so on and so forth, these ions, they need help getting through this cell membrane. And this could happen via these proteins. All right, in green. Scroll up here. So the proteins. So proteins, there's quite a few configurations. I'm just going to touch on the few major ones here, or the pretty much almost the only ones. But so we have transmembrane proteins, all right, transmembrane, or integrins. Stylus isn't keeping up here. I'm not going to write all these out. This is taking way too long to write. The transmembrane proteins, we'll say the long ones here, okay? They span throughout the membrane, transmembrane. And what these do is they can help, let's say, for example, these charged ions, it does other things too, go back and forth throughout the cell. So let's say you have a like muscle contraction. Just think of things that go in and out of the cell, the sodium-potassium pump, things like that. Those are functions of this. So there is passive and active transport. Okay? I'm trying to keep this as brief as I can because I feel like you guys already have a good grip on this. All right, so passive and active transport. We need ATP for active. Think about it. A, active ATP. Passive transport is just things that follow their concentration gradient. I'm going to use this. In chemistry and things like that, we use those brackets to signify a concentration of something. So concentration gradient. All right? And it allows things to maintain homeostasis. So, for example, if we didn't have these things and we just allowed, let's say, sodium to go in and out of the cells as it wanted to, we would have some major issues with tonicity, osmolality, and things like that. We'd probably puff up and die. So just think of it that way. These other proteins, so let's talk about these peripheral proteins. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make this blue, if it is blue. All right. These proteins help with signaling. All right. That's not the only thing they do, but that's the primary thing they do. So signaling, cell recognition, things like that. Think about it that way. A major, just an example, is MHC 1 and 2. All right, and this isn't the only thing, but I think this is interesting. So major histocompatibility complex, and that has a huge thing to do with your immune system, okay? And it's kind of how things are regulated between your T cells and CD4, CD8, and things like that. That's neither here nor there, but just an example. And there's also things that come off in this area and are connected to it, and they are glycoproteins and glycolipids. And their configurations and such really, they'll express certain things that the cell would like to express to other cells. So let's just think of it that way. So that's a very important protein. And all these proteins function in the same way, maybe maintaining cell integrity, allowing transport, and identification. So just think of it that way. All right? So without more torture, I'll just leave it at this because this is pretty much what you need to know for the building blocks. So remember, things that diffuse through the cell membrane are small, nonpolar molecules, all right? Things that absolutely will not are, let's say, your charged ions. So just think of your electrolytes, all right? And they need help. And usually you have transmembrane proteins, peripheral proteins, you have intermediate proteins here, and then, you know, they're just little different configurations. But just remember the transmembrane protein and the signaling proteins out there, okay? The cells need to identify each other. Remember that the phospholipid bilayer at its basic sense is made up of lipid molecules that are polar, okay? One end is hydrophilic and one end is the middle is hydrophobic, okay? Blue for water here, H2O, H2O, and then yellow for fat, okay? Let's just say fat. Loves it. Alrighty. So I hope this helped out a little bit. This should be a quick review. Please let me know if you have any questions. Email me or Amanda, whoever you need to talk to. All right. Thanks for watching.